Welcome to Why Such a Fuss, an exciting new channel dedicated to help individuals and businesses to learn more about data protection in a way that is easy and engaging. I'm Christina from CVG Solutions, and I am a fully qualified data protection professional. I am passionate about educating, empowering, and enabling businesses to thrive. Remember to like and subscribe to this channel and help us to spread the word. Data protection is there for a reason. It protects you, your family, loved ones, customers, employees from coming to harm through the use of personal data. So make sure you click subscribe. Now, get ready to embark on a journey of growth and knowledge as we dive into the world of data protection. Annie McNeely, Quality Management System Professional and ISO 9001 Auditor, is joining us again today. Hi, Annie, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me once again. Happy to be here.
Good. I think we need to stop meeting like this.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
Oh, it's lovely to have you back. I'm really pleased, and I'm really looking
Thank you.
forward to our discussion today because we are going to be talking about bursting some myths that we both come across into our respective spheres of expertise. And I think that as we go through them, these will really help our audience to acquire a wider knowledge and also obtain a greater awareness of our spheres and the myths that are out there that have been created through ignorance, through fears, to miscommunications, etc. So I'm really looking forward to our discussion today.
Yeah,
so
it's an
since you're a
interesting
guest, Annie, you go first. What's your first one?
Okay, well, so the big one for me, and this is probably the most prevalent misconception around ISO, is that it's a paperwork exercise. It's not a sort of a live thing in your business, it's a paperwork exercise. Now, in fairness, that perception or misperception exists for a reason. And there are actually a few reasons why people see it that way. And it almost always comes down to how the system has been implemented in the first place. And so my fellow consultants have a bit of the blame, for want of a better word here. Very often what happens is you go into a business as a consultant and you're putting a system in place, a quality management system in place in that organization. And there might be 3 or 4 people from the business who are heavily involved in working on that system, and the rest of the business doesn't really get involved. So the only bit that the rest of the people in that organization come up against or have any contact with is the procedures, because they have to follow them. And so their perception of the quality management system is that it's just a bunch of procedure documents or paperwork, for want of a better word, and that's the system. And so they have this perception that a quality management system equals documentation or paperwork.
Yes.
Because they don't see the rest of it. So
yeah,
that's their only experience of it. So if you involve people, everyone possible, as much as possible from day one, they get a much better understanding of the system as a whole, and they don't see it as a paperwork exercise because they see the rest of the system. That's one reason why people see it that way. The other reason is that sometimes, and this leads on to another very common misconception, which is kind of related. Sometimes they push us to get the certification because they need that to land a particular contract or win a tender or what have you. So all the focus is on getting the certification rather than building an effective system. And so that sort of system build bit is the bare minimum required to be compliant and get you through an audit. And that is literally a bunch of paperwork. And this is the other common misconception, it's treated like a tick box exercise. So rather than building a system which is applicable and relevant to your business and which delivers all the benefits, they build a system which is compliant with the standard to get them a certificate.
Yes. So they're doing it for the purpose of the certificate,
That's
rather than for the purpose of being
effective
better,
quality management.
yeah.
And so that you literally do end up with a set of documents which make sure you tick certain boxes, which get you over the line and get you your certificate. But what you haven't got necessarily is a really active, effective quality management system. And so, not surprisingly, the other people in the business who sort of come up against this along the way see it as a tick box exercise or a paperwork exercise, because that's how it's been implemented.
Yeah.
So, and that happens a lot. And it's not how it should be done, but it is often how it is done. And so people come away with this perception that it's just paperwork and a bunch of tick boxes.
Yeah.
Which, if you treat it as a proper implementation of a system, then it makes your life a lot easier and you get a lot more benefit from it. So that's one big myth, or a couple of the big myths that I always try and counteract wherever possible.
Yes. There is one, there's two that are linked. And particularly, I come across these with small businesses, primarily the micro businesses, where they sort of they get the misconception that because they paid the ICO fees, I'm registered with the ICO because I went into their website, I did their small self-assessment, I paid my fee, I received an email with a certification number, and therefore I'm compliant. And actually, there is a little bit of naughtiness from the ICO because it isn't a certification. There is no such a thing as a GDPR compliance certification. So that is quite misleading. But all it is just a receipt. Okay? And they give you a number, like an ID number, if you want, for your organization. And so they can track you in terms of, because every year you need to pay this fee.
Yeah.
But and so it gives the business a false sense of security that they are compliant, when in reality they're not, because the fee is just a tax.
Yeah.
It has absolutely nothing to do with the obligations that the law imposes on a business.
Yeah.
And so, and it applies to any business, no matter the size. So in charities, including like a club sport, that has no
non-profit.
That's it, non-profit, like, I don't know, a volleyball club. It applies to them as well in different measures, don't get me wrong. But there's still an element of data protection that needs to be applied. And so there is this sense of, I've got a GDPR certification, which again doesn't exist. And the next bit is I must be compliant because I have the certification. And so that it's really, really misleading. And so very often when I have a conversation with someone, I have to, or if I'm doing a presentation, if I'm a guest speaker, I always put this forward and say, look, do not sit on your laurels, because it's just a tax. In terms of compliance, it means nothing.
Yeah, all that does is plug you into the system, as it were, but you haven't done anything to be compliant at that stage. Yeah,
that's right. Yes,
that's definitely a trap. I can see how that can be a trap for small businesses to fall into. Yeah.
Yes. So I think the ICO should change their terminology,
make it clearer.
It is, and more transparent, which actually is one of the principles of the GDPR. So they should really lead by example, as they say.
Absolutely, yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's an interesting. You mentioned sort of being legally compliant there. That's an interesting contrast, if you like, between what you do and what I do, and it brings me to another one of the myths, actually, because there is in some instances a misconception that having ISO certification is a legal requirement, and it's not at all. Whereas what you do is definitely a legal requirement. ISO certification is not a legal requirement. I think where the confusion kicks in is, again, there's maybe a couple of reasons. One is that in order to be ISO compliant, one of the things you need to do is follow all the regulations, rules, laws, statutes which apply to your business. But that's only one small part of the ISO standard, and you have to do that anyway. It's nothing to do with ISO. You have to be compliant with the rules and regulations that apply to your business anyway. But ISO kind of brings that into it's one of the requirements that they bring into the framework.
Yeah. And also, if you think about it as a standard, it would be really quite wrong of them to say, forget about the law.
Don't worry about that. Yeah. Or even to not mention it, because what they're aiming for is best practice, of course. So, one element of best practice is to operate in a legally compliant manner.
Yes.
So I think that's one area where people maybe get a bit confused. And I think the other reason they get confused is because a lot of people are aware that ISO certification is important if you want to work with public sector organizations.
Yes.
And so somewhere in that process, it gets confused and misinterpreted as it being a sort of a legal requirement or a statutory requirement. Again, it's not, but a lot of public sector organizations do either prefer that their suppliers be ISO certified or require them to be ISO certified to carry out certain activities for them. But it's still on the part of the person, on the part of the business, the supplier that wants to work with them. It's still optional. There is no legal requirement. It's just it gets you through the door more easily. Yes. But I think that association with local government or local authority or public sector gets morphed into it's a legal requirement when it's not. It's more like joining a club. You decide you want to join the club. Do you meet the entry requirements? Have you paid your dues?
Yes.
In you go.
Yeah. So. Yeah. One is obviously with GDPR is different because it's the law, like you said earlier.
Yeah.
So you really don't have much choice.
No, you don't have a choice. No, that's right.
Yes. But it's really interesting because there is again a lot of myths that I come across. One is we do not have any data at all. Because there is this misconception of data that is something that it's in the cloud or God knows where it is. And so I always say, well, have you got clients or customers? Yes. Okay. Well, then you have data.
Yeah.
Or there is another one. We only have a small amount of data, just names and email addresses. Well, it's still data.
It's still data. Yeah. It's still information that you don't want to get into the wrong hands.
Exactly. So, so those are really. The other one is our software is GDPR compliant. So it's like saying a shredder is GDPR compliant because it's not. It really is. Now, I'm not saying, the software might have some security features as built within it, which is great, don't get me wrong, but it's not that makes you compliant. There is no such a thing as, GDPR compliant software because it's the data that you collect, that you put into that software, how you're using it, for what purposes, for what legal basis. That is what makes you compliant, not the software.
Yeah.
So those are the three, if you want. We don't have any data. We only have names or email addresses, or our software is fully compliant, and therefore we've got nothing to do. We're all done. So you're fine, and that could not be farther from the truth.
Yeah.
And that actually then leads me to another one. I just thought about it. This sort of said again, I guess this: we are fully compliant. We take GDPR very seriously. We're fully compliant. We get it all sorted. It's with our IT department.
Yeah.
So again, you're totally passing the buck. And again, not understanding the regulation, not understanding how it applies. So I use these actually when I do my training. And I sort of, one of the things that I say at the very beginning of my training is it does not sit with the IT department. GDPR is the responsibility of everyone within an organization, from the top guy or woman all the way down to the bottom, in different measures, don't get me wrong, but it is everyone's responsibility. Because the IT department doesn't stop you, for example, from sending an email to the wrong recipient, and that is a data breach. And that it was gonna break your compliance if you were compliant, for example. So so those are the one that make me roll my eyes, by the same time make me smile.
There are a couple of parallels actually with ISO that kind of relate to that. So one where you're saying your clients say, well, we haven't got any data, so it doesn't apply.
Yeah.
With what I do with quality management, sometimes businesses say, well, we're a service business, we don't manufacture anything or supply a product, so it doesn't apply.
Yeah.
And as with GDPR, ISO and quality management is holistic. It doesn't matter whether you have a product or a service. And actually, if you read the standard, it was updated a while back to make it more obviously applicable to service businesses. So now it talks about products and services in the standard. It doesn't matter if you're not a manufacturing business. Quality management is holistic across the whole organization. And it applies regardless of whether you're a production or a supply business or a service business. So that's quite a common one. We're not manufacturers, so it doesn't apply. Well, it absolutely does, and it absolutely can.
Absolutely.
And you mentioned there about sort of top down. One of the
Yes.
other things that I encounter is and this is often from people who come from maybe like a blue chip organization. They've gone into a role managing a smaller company, so they've got exposure of ISO from previous roles, but probably a bit back in the day, as it were, and their perception is that leadership doesn't need to get involved. That we've got that person's going to be our quality manager, or we're going to appoint you to do it for us, or so we don't need to get involved. You absolutely do need to get involved, because and then same with your stuff, it's cultural, and culture comes from the top. So the leadership need to be walking the walk and talking the talk.
Absolutely.
And B, the standard is quite specific. It's one area of the standard where they are somewhat prescriptive.
Yeah.
They're quite specific about the responsibilities of leadership.
Yeah.
So as an auditor, when you're going into a business, the first thing you want to do is sit down and talk to the senior management and ask them what are their strategic plans for the business, and how do their quality management objectives feed into that, and what are they doing to promote a process approach. And so when you explain this sometimes to general managers, MDs, owners, there's this sort of dawning realization that having made the decision to put this into their business, they're actually now going to have to take part, when they thought that maybe they could just hand it all over to someone else to get on with. And of course, the system build, a lot of that can be done with people a bit further down the food chain, but it still needs senior management to have input on objectives, risk management, resources, some of the fairly sort of strategic decisions that are needed in terms of the system. So and that responsibility continues for as long as they are certified.
Yes.
So they can't just ignore it and carry on doing what they always did and expect someone else to carry the can. That's not how it works.
No, they can't pass the back, like you said.
They can't.
Like in my case, we're shifting it, the IT department. They can't. You can't do that. It's just GDPR, and in your case ISO, it's bigger than one department.
It's the whole business.
It's the whole business. It's the whole organization. And so actually, when you were talking about, this guy that you mentioned that is coming from the FTSE one, the blue chip company, one of the things, again, that small businesses have this misconception of is that, GDPR only applies to the big businesses. It doesn't apply to me. I'm a small business. And again, that could not be further from the truth, because it applies to anyone, because we have data. As a business, in order for you to function, whether you're a manufacturer or a service, doesn't matter, you have data. You have your customers' contact details. As a minimum, you have your customers' contact details, and therefore you have data. Even if that's all you've got, it's data. And so GDPR will apply. And so again, there is another one that I think is primarily in small businesses. I have a data protection policy, so I'm fine. All right. That's it. I've got my cookie policy, I've got my privacy notice on the website, and I've got my data protection policy. So what else do I need? I'm all right. Well, there is a bunch of and lots of other things that you need. I mean, the ICO, the regulator, has actually created what they call accountability framework, and it's got 350 questions.
Wow.
based on broken down into 10 elements. So you've got leadership, you've got training, you've got policy, you've got data breaches, security. So if for each of those sections there are questions that adds up to 350 questions. So I've taken that and streamlined it to apply it to small businesses, but nevertheless it's still 100 plus question. And so that just goes to show that it's not just about having 3 policies or a handful of policies, because even if that was the case, those policies that you need to apply them to your business. So you need to have the process around it to apply those policies, to oblige, or comply with those policies.
The size thing is an interesting one, because that's another one that I encounter, is that we're we even if they understand the benefits of an ISO certification or a quality management system, they think they're too small to do it because it's for big businesses. And again, that's not the case. I mean, I've got clients who are sole traders.
Yes.
It's about how you operate such that you optimize and improve your business outputs for your clients. And that applies to any business, regardless of size. In fairness, it can be difficult to take that on board when there's only 1 or 2 of you, and if you're a very small business, to get the system set up. But there are ways to achieve that which don't kind of run you into the ground. I would argue that even if you're a startup, you might not necessarily want to go for a fully fledged quality management system, but there are certain things that you should be doing from day one. And by putting processes in place, for example, and by doing that, you smooth out that whole growth process and make it a lot less painful, a lot less disruptive. It's more stable, it's more sustainable. So the earlier, the better. And size is not an issue. Small businesses can and should actually be doing this stuff. You find that small businesses grow kind of organically up to a point. And then they start hitting problems because the operations haven't kept up with the growth. So they get stuck and they can't get to that next level because their operations can't handle the additional business or activity in the business. Whereas if you've got at least parts of a quality management system in place up to that point, it gets you over that barrier and you can keep growing. So any business that has sort of medium to long-term growth plans should include within that quality management activities. So that no business is too small or too young.
Yeah, absolutely. And I totally agree with you. And actually, yes, GDPR is the law, but forget about that for a minute, because there is a lot of benefits about, implementing GDPR within your organization, including if you are a micro business, like a one-man band, because it sort of helps you and in a way forces you to operate with higher standards. Which as you grow, that will become a really solid foundation. And actually, it does propel you for growth. And
it's much easier than trying to retrofit stuff after your business is kind of exploded and everyone's already super busy, and just trying to manage the workload. To then try and retrospectively apply some of these principles is much, much harder than if you instill them early on.
Absolutely. So, start as you mean to go on, as they say, isn't it?
Exactly. Yes. 100%.
One other one that I get is our data, because I'm talking about sort of backups and security, how do you to retrieve the data if you get hacked. Well, our data is in the cloud. Good luck to the hackers, because it's everywhere in the world. Doesn't quite work like that. Being in the cloud, all it means is that it's in someone else's server. It could be Amazon, it could be Google, it could be someone local, and it's ring fenced if you want. And so it's not everywhere. It's in a specific location. You need to have the correct sort of security measures in place. So the cloud is just, again, another myth to create confusion. It simply means that it's on someone else's server.
It's a different location for storing your information, right?
Exactly. So that's think of when you're hiring storage, for furniture or for something physical, it's the same thing. You're renting a box, if you want, in a storage facility.
As opposed to keeping it on site in your premises, essentially.
So that's really how it is. Yes. And then one recently that come up, which, well, it reminded me that it's come out a few times. And so again, there is this misconception or assumption that because a big established organization like, I don't know, like Google or the NHS, those kind of organization, because they are using something or they're doing something in a certain way, then if it's good for them, then it's got to be good for us. Okay. We're forgetting that, for example, the NHS had several data breaches last year, some really quite severe. The police in Northern Ireland also had a massive data breach that is still going on today. And that was followed by some other data breaches in the police in Nottingham and Cambridge, if I remember correctly. Serco, who is a large organization, they've also just recently received an enforcement notice from the ISO because they've been naughty, they've not done things properly. So again, just because the NHS, Google, or whoever, Microsoft, whoever it might be, they're doing it in one way and using that particular third party provider, if they are using it, then what's wrong with it? You need to do your own homework and make your own decision and not make assumptions, because those assumptions could and will prove to be incorrect. And also you also need to have your own justification for choosing to go down this way or choosing to use that product or whatever it might be. You can't just simply say, oh, Google does it, so I'm doing it too. It's not going to fly.
Just because it's a big organization doesn't mean they're doing it properly, unfortunately.
No.
You'd think, but no. So the last one for me is about certification itself. And not all certificates are the same, but there's a lack of awareness around this. So when you are looking for a certification body, so the company that comes and does the audits, the external audits to give you your certification, you need to be looking for a certification body which is UCAS accredited. There are certification bodies out there which are not UCAS accredited. And if you get a certificate through them, you may find that some organizations that you want to work with will not accept your certification because it's not UCAS accredited. And I've seen a few businesses fall into this trap. They've gone through the system build, they've got their certification, the certificate's not UCAS accredited, which doesn't reflect necessarily on their system. They might have a perfectly good system, but their customers will only accept UCAS accredited certification. So it's an important point, and it's one that lots of people are not aware of that. So you have to be careful about where you get your certification or what kind of organization you use for your certification. So always make sure that they are UCAS, accredited. UKACS accredited. It's a quality marker in essence. And a lot of big companies, especially big organizations, will not accept your certification if it's not UCAS accredited.
And also the government will not accept it either.
Public sector, same. It's an important, really important actually. And you can change it even if you've got non-UCAS accredited certification. You can change it, but there are costs involved and it takes time. And so you'd be better off to just make sure from day one that it's UCAS. That's an important one.
Yes. Annie, thank you again for joining us today. And would you mind reminding our audience how to get in touch with you?
Sure. So you can find me on LinkedIn under Annie McNeely. My website is anniemcneely.co.uk. And all of my contact details are on my LinkedIn profile. If you want to drop me a line or give me a call, always happy to have a chat.
Thank you. And if you liked this video, please remember to give it a thumbs up and also to click on subscribe so that you're not going to miss any future episodes. If you would like to get in touch with me, I can be reached through LinkedIn, Facebook, or Instagram. Just simply search CVG Solutions, or you can email me at info@cvgsolutions.co.uk.